Welcome to yet another edition of Kids Ed Studio.
Good morning to all. We have a special story that we would like to share with you.
The title of our story is Ruby and the Rubbish Bin. This story is written by Maggot Sunderland and illustrated by Nikki Armstrong. So, relax and enjoy! Once there was a little girl called Ruby. The trouble was, Ruby felt more like a piece of rubbish than a little girl. Sometimes she felt like something you find in a bin. Sometimes she felt like something on the pavement that people stand on. Children in the background shouted,
Ruby rubbish!
Big bully boys yelled from the bus,
Silly girly woolly hair!
They even dropped their ice cream wrappers on Ruby's head.
One of Ruby's teachers, Mrs. Fruity Nose, often picked on Ruby. She said,
Hey you! Can you sit up straight? Can you be neater? Can you stop being so lazy, Ruby?
When Ruby drew a house, she said to herself, It's a rubbish house.
Then she scribbled it out and threw it away. And when Ruby looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a yucky, smelly girl.
You're so ugly,
thought Ruby. After school, Ruby liked hanging around the rubbish bins. She didn't know why she liked it. She just did. Sometimes she even felt like getting into one of the bins and never coming out. Every Friday, the dustbin man came to empty the rubbish from the bins. Hello, sweetie, said one of them.
I'm not a sweetie,
said Ruby.
I'm rubbish.
Each Saturday, Ruby went to the sweet shop to buy some candies.
There you are, Lovey,
said the sweet shop lady.
I'm not a lovey,
said Ruby.
I'm rubbish.
And the last time she was there, a little girl said, I like your hair.
It's stupid girly whirly hair,
said Ruby.
It's funny,
she thought,
how people get you so wrong.
Then, one day at school, there was a new teacher called Mrs. Dot. Mrs. Dot had just moved into a house in the same street as Ruby. When Ruby stood in the lunch queue, Mrs. Dot smiled at Ruby. It was such a lovely smile that something warm happened in Ruby's tummy. In fact, Ruby was so surprised by the smile that she dropped her lunch. Oh dear, let me help you, said Mrs. Dot. Ruby was so surprised that Mrs. Dot hadn't called her stupid for dropping her lunch.
Never mind, sweetheart,
said Mrs. Dot, putting her arm around Ruby.
It's funny how things can go wrong in twos, isn't it?
Ruby tried to tell Mrs. Dot that she wasn't a sweetheart. She was rubbish, but it didn't quite come out because by then she had a big lump in her throat and wanted to cry. On her way home, Ruby passed by Mrs. Dot's house. Mrs. Dot was sitting in the garden in a deck chair.
Hey, Ruby, I've got something for you,
said Mrs. Dot. To Ruby's surprise, Mrs. Dot had drawn a picture of Ruby with lots of rubbish on her head.
Ruby, some of the nice teachers at school told me about how you think you are rubbish. Well, now I think you've got into a bit of a muddle. You see, when some people feel small, they try to make themselves feel big by making other people feel small instead. This is how bullies get made. But when it's you they pick on, it makes you feel you're rubbish.
Mrs. Dot continued crossly.
And if people can't see how lovely you are, that's their loss, not yours.
Ruby didn't quite understand this last bit, but it made the warm thing happen in her tummy again.
That night, Ruby had a dream. In her dream, people were piling all sorts of rubbish over her head. Ruby was drowning in the rubbish, and then it got even more horrible because someone mistook Ruby for rubbish and put her in the bin too. It was awful. But then, something amazing happened. In her dream, Ruby suddenly felt very angry, and her anger made her feel so strong that she poured the rubbish right back over everyone.
Next day in class, Mrs. Fruity Nose scolded Ruby for too many crossings out. Ted the Tough jeered at her for getting cheese sauce on her sweater, and someone called her stupid for wearing odd socks. Suddenly, Ruby had had enough. She remembered her dream.
This time, however, she did not pour the rubbish bag over everyone. Instead, she took control of the situation. She stood up.
Excuse me, everybody. Let's get one thing straight from now on. I'm not rubbish. I'm really upset with people who feel bad about themselves trying to make me feel bad instead. If you can't see that I'm lovely, then it's your loss, not mine.
Everyone clapped except for the bullies, who fell over in shock. Even Mrs. Footy-Nose looked surprised.
Ruby often visited Mrs. Dot in her garden. They became great friends. Together they would do some gardening and laugh and talk. It was so much fun that sometimes they felt to Ruby as if they were flying together. And whenever Ruby went back to feeling rubbish, because of course she did from time to time, Mrs. Dot would listen very carefully and help her to sort out her feelings so well that the warm thing happened in Ruby's tummy again.
And after that, with her new friends, Ruby started visiting the little park at the end of her street. It was full of flowers and ponds.
Not hanging around the rubbish anymore?
Asked the dustbin man as he walked by.
No, I prefer being here now.
Said Ruby.
It's so lovely.
Just like you.
Said the dustbin man.
Yes, just like me.
Said Ruby.
We hope you enjoyed our story. Thank you for staying tuned to us.
This is Kids at Studio signing out.